Yeah, we talk about Boris Energy like it's some like really reasonable, like noble deck. They're still playing Ocelot, Pride, and Ragavan. Like they are not messing around when it comes to, I guess, the rest of the MH3 cards that got left, as you mentioned. So certainly some powerful cards we should see across the day here as players consider their next few keeps. And it looks like we might be keeping here. It looks like Linden's keeping. So if we're playing a land, we should be off to the races. Well, never mind. It's one on the bottom. That's a keep, and that's a keep on the other side. Turn one belongs to Linden, and it's Mishra's Bauble. That's not a land. Almost got there.
He tricked you there, but it's all right. That's how they do it. Notably, Chris had the choice between Flage and Blood Moon in the opening hand here to keep on 6. Bottomed the Flage, kept the Blood Moon. So that's an element to this game that we might need to keep in mind. Now, this is open deck list. Both players know that Chris has access to Blood Moon, but it's only a 2 of. So I'm curious to see if Linden wants to play around that as the game develops.
All right, we're cracking a Pluto Delta, and lots of shuffling as expected at any Magic tournament these days. Go ahead and find ourselves a Steam Vents for Team Vents. Interesting, but good to see that the branding is being relatively represented here, both on the table and on the shirt.
It's good to be consistent.
It is good to be consistent. We'll see what the tournament play is here. It is a preordained Serum Visions. Somewhere still in the deck, but we'll have a little opt instead and see what we like here as far as card selection goes. Keep. Oh, not yet.
It looks like Linden's hand's a little awkward at the moment. I think he kept like a Bauble preordained fetch with the idea of that making it all come together, and Holy Heat off the top there. Nice one.
There's Tamiyo as well, also a nice one. Not banned in Legacy, perhaps I wish it was, but Psychic Frog is banned in Legacy. Get to play here in Modern for Grixis. Potentially, we could play the Frog here with 2 lands, but going to consider all the options here as Chris just passes it back, excuse me. And there's Tamiyo. Go ahead.
Nice. And this is a really, I think great moment for those at home who are trying to first step into Modern. You might be thinking, well, Linden only has, a 1-mana kill spell and a 1-mana creature. Why is he even thinking here? He obviously has to play this. And from Linden's perspective, he's giving Chris a chance to use a card like Galvanic Discharge and then curve into it too. He could hold up his mana and maybe then weave in that Tamiyo on a later turn there. So it seems really innocuous, but even just that small kind of nod of like, should I even play this card? Is the difference maker if you're at home and trying to make your way out here to these regional championships and pro tours.
Yeah. So what Chris wants here lines up a second Sacred Foundry. Very impressive looking art there. I'm going to go ahead and pass the turn. And we'll crack a land here on Linden's side. My brain is trying to pass all of the beautiful arts in Chris's deck. Eventually, I'll figure out what card on that card on the table is. That's what I'm going to surveil here for Linden.
I believe it's Goblin Bombardment.
That would make sense. That in my head that lined up. But let me tell you, there's a lot of Magic art these days.
There is. It used to be my superpower when I first started commentary about 3 or 4 years ago, that I just knew all the arts all the time at an instant. It used to be like a little mini game. They try to trick me. Nowadays, sometimes they get me, but I still got a little bit. This old dog can with new tricks.
Oh yeah, that's a counterpult if my Google foo is to be believed, which is a very niche secret layer. But fetch a Lavash perhaps here for the Boros Energy deck as Linden considering the surveil here.
Yeah, and it looks like Linden's hand Force a Negation, Quantum Riddler, and Holy Heat. If he has another blue card, being able to Force a Negation here and then maybe draw a land. Yeah, he did have the subtlety. This could be potentially a great way for Linden to get a bunch of new resources if a land's drawn here, as we will be meeting the requirements for Quantum Riddler to draw 2.
Always good. It's funny. It's not a consideration I always think of these days, but it is interesting to see these blue decks wanting to go low on cards on purpose in order to draw extra cards off the Riddler. It's just that powerful. Cantripping is good, but drawing a couple extra cards is even better.
Exactly. And this is one of those things too that like Quantum Riddler, you should really stick out to players is when it asks you just to play Magic, right? It's like, hey, interact, trade 1 for 1, and I'll reward you for doing that. That's always something that I'm looking for when I'm, looking to play cards or decks. Is don't ask too much of me and give me a lot out. As we do see Quantum Riddler cast here, and we get 2 cards into the Warp Zone and just passing the turn.
Feels really good. As a reminder, though, turn 3 is coming up for both players, so powerful 3-drops are going to be online. Flage, obviously, a little ways away from sticking on the table for Chris, but could potentially get that train rolling if they want to.
Beautiful Kamigawa Plains.
Oh, we love to see it. Absolutely gorgeous arts here in Chris's deck. And Blood Moon, the card we looked at earlier, that is pretty good on this board, even with 1 basic there for Linden.
Yeah, Linden picked up a psychic frog. Oh my goodness. Another quantum riddler off the top. Maybe a way to find some basics there. I was gonna say how we picked up psychic frog and we were pretty happy, but with the blood moon, we're now locked underneath things. So Linden's deck, I would say, is predominantly blue black and is sort of playing a little red. So he has cards like Unholy Heat. He will be able to cast cards, as we do see Unholy Heat here on the Ajani in order to answer that. But wow, this is going to be an interesting one to see if we can get out of it.
Yeah, Blood Moon, especially in the main, certainly tricksy for a lot of these decks. I mean, certainly not that color intensive across all the decks here, as now Spellbomb's going to be put on the board. That's going to be good for later against the aforementioned Flage, but not for right now, as Linden's still stuck on lands trying to bail their way out of the situation where Blood Moon is locking them out of a lot of potential plays here, and the Boros Energy deck is not going to stop. There's Ragavan Dashed coming onto the board. And that one also is going to eat a removal spell.
And we see Chris here is playing Seasoned Pyroman. So we had saw one of our random deck lists from the field, that was playing Foucault. They had Goblin, they had Fable the Mirror Breaker, the very good grindy Goblin. Seasoned Pyromancer, like Quantum Riddler, once you really just to throw your cards on the board, and you see why a lot of players default to it there, as it's just a raw draw to here in these late game scenarios.
Yeah, it's funny. Magic has kind of become as more removal is going to get pointed over at the creatures. This is really where Grixis midrange wants to be, trying to poke as many spells as they can against these very powerful creatures. But another bombardment's going to come down. The cows are ready to get thrown over, and still a creature is on the board. So Linden still struggling again, looking for land drops. Finally finds one, but it's a mountain. Boros Energy happy with where the game is going right now to keep deploying threats. There's Guide of Souls. What do you have? Pass back. Ooh, hate to see it there for the defending champion. And Guide of Soul is going to come over, swinging in for a little bit more damage. Linden now going to be down to 10, I believe.
Yes, and this is also why you see so many players as here comes Flage, the Titan of Fire's Fury. It will
thank you.
disputed. And like you mentioned before, we have that Nile Spellbomb. If Linden top decks a swamp, he could, pop it and draw a card if he wants to. Also could play Psychic Frog in that world, but
Spell Snare. And there's the frog as well, but as you mentioned, still trapped, is going to shut off the graveyard regardless. No cantrip off of this spellbomb, but still keeps the Flage at bay. Pretty important, given that you invested an entire counterspell in putting that in the graveyard. I want to make sure it stays in exile. But Boros Energy going to keep making land drops and keep swinging over again. Also does more damage than you think with that Goblin Bombardment on the table. Doesn't take too many tokens to get things going, as Pyromancer going to keep the train rolling, drawing more cards, filtering some of these charms away, and keeping the cards flowing for Chris, as again the creatures head back into the red zone for 3 more. Guide of Souls up, and Linden's going to scoop it out. I think that was lethal there. Must have had enough damage with the Goblin Bombardment and potentially the energy trigger. And the players talking among themselves decide that enough is enough. Blood Moon, as you highlighted, Mason, really the card that kind of hammered down game 1.
Yeah, and this is why you see players willing to pull the trigger on a card that's traditionally thought as like a sideboard cards for decks like Tron and Amulet, because it is really good in those matchups. And you're very happy to kind of, oh, I queued into this deck this round. Yippee, here's my Blood Moon. But against some other decks too, they just get caught slipping, right? And from Linden's perspective, his draw, he had to make it come together a little bit, right? He was on that mulligan to 6, and he tried his best to respect a Blood Moon, but he can't be overly respectful of it and not be able to cast his other cards. So, sometimes you just get that free win. And will Chris keep that in post-board is another little mini game Linden has to be thinking about. Probably not, but there is a world where sometimes players just leave in a Blood Moon just to kind of keep you honest, and could be getting him in game 2 or 3.
Yeah, we'll have to see here. So take a quick look once again at Linden's Grixis midrange deck. Having a quick peek at the sideboard here, trying to see what we might want to bring in. Some Thoughtseizers, have an Orcish Brewmaster. Lots of one-offs here. This is a Grixis player classic. They just want as many different options on their platter as they can bring into their deck. Colligan's Command, more Spell Snares if we feel like that's going to be good. Lots of potential options here. Anything strike your fancy there, Mason?
Yeah, Fire Magic really jumps out to me just as a way to kind of control cards like the Cats. Bowmaster, actually a similar place. Really good way to shoot down some of the incidental little creatures. And then cards like Pyromancer that are going to refuel us, we can punish those a bit. And Spell Snare is going to be a primo card, I think, in this matchup, as there are a lot of really good 2s, like a Johnny, like a Goblin Barbarian, but also just being a 1-mana way to kind of catch back and interact, I think is going to be really good. So I'm excited to see those. And I'm going to guess that Kaito is probably not at its best in this matchup, but I'm curious to see what Linden thinks when it comes to coming out.
Yeah, I think probably want card advantage creatures are a little bit cheaper, a little bit more tempo oriented rather than the grindier stuff that Kaito brings to the table. And again, the plan really still get the Riddler going, warp it back eventually, get the Psychic Frog online, maybe get a Tamio going. None of that really happened for Linden. Had kind of the early spells, tried to trade out the removal, Blood Moon came down, and then all the spells got trapped in hand. So we'll see how it phases out. As I'm actually checking the basics again now that we're here. A swamp and 2 islands, so certainly enough to insulate against Blood Moon, assuming you fetch around it. I'm very curious to see if Linden can afford to fetch around a potential Blood Moon, or if you just kind of have to, again, take the gamble. Because it's interesting, like you said, it might just be the Boros Energy player. Chris just wants to take them out. So that is a pretty big, like, that's a pretty strong amount of influence for a little 2-of to have, even in your post-board games, even if it's not in your deck, about how your opponent has to approach actually sequencing their land drops. That's one of the reasons Blood Moon is, quite a good card.
Yeah, and from Linden's perspective, no matter what, he's going to need to play at least a third game on the draw, right? Yeah. And that's going to be the one I think where he's going to really pay attention to game 2 and then pay attention to will Chris sideboard for game 3, because on the play, Ragavan into Blood Moon is one of the best ways to kind of cheese any matchup in Modern. Even if you have plenty of fetches, plenty of basics, you got to have it in time, and there's not much time in that world. So I'm curious to see how that goes. As when it comes to the sideboarding here, we see the the Fuko Saga we talked about earlier. I have to imagine that card jumps out to us here as it's just a way to draw a lot of cards. As Edgar Magalhaes would say, here's my good deck with some divinations in the sideboard. So nice. We're going to bring that in. And then Celestial Purge is just sort of kills Psychic Frog in Kaito. So I kind of want the first one. My question is sort of, will we bring in both? And, is actually that first one better than some of these great kill spells that the Boros Energy deck just main decks? Because it's really just Psychic Frog, and I guess the sideboard Orcish Bowmaster when it comes to black creatures. But Psychic Frog matters a lot and does outscale some of your removal.
Yeah, I think Purge seems like the spot you bring it in, much like the original Purge of your back in. Oh god, is that Mirrodin block? Why am I so old? Anyway, also can see a Vexing Bubble poking out of Chris's sideboard. I can't imagine we're going to be bringing that one in here just for Force of Negation, even though Force was decent in game 1. That card also potentially maybe coming out if Linden just wants to be on kind of the kill all of your small creatures and then eventually take over the game plan. But as you said, both players going to be bringing a hefty number of divinations both pre and post board. So game 1 felt relatively grindy with Blood Moon kind of locking things out. I think if that isn't as much of a factor, I do expect this game to be quite grindy in general. I mean, you do not bring Grixis to a tournament if you don't expect to play, some grindy games. And if Linden wants to start off with a similar record to the last time as the defending RC champion, he's going to have to really grind it out on the draw in game 3, as you mentioned. So could be a rough road ahead, but plenty of play here between these two decks. I think it's one of the nice things about Boros Energy versus, another relatively fair deck. The games of Magic feel relatively honest for Modern.
Yeah, the only really unhonest thing that would happen in game 1 was sometimes that Blood Moon but besides that, it is pretty normalish Magic, and it is fun. Like, the games are interesting. You have to sequence your spells correctly. Am I going to run out this Voice of Victory really early and maybe run into a spell snare, or am I going to maybe oh, here's my Ajani, please don't counter it. Like, there's a lot of how do I want to sequence my spells? Which one's my opponent going to fight over? And also, do I want to be, attacking or defending? There's a lot of very sort of small decisions, but those small decisions add up and are what make Magic so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, especially registering. I mean, you're registering red-white cards. You better understand how to sequence your cards correctly. That's all you have, I mean, now we have divinations, I suppose. We're actually going to pop over to another table while we wait for our feature match to come back around. We are jumping into the middle of a game that is currently complicating me, but 2 Eldrazi Spawn on one side and some black lands on the other.
It looks like Golgari Birthing Ritual here on the left would be my guess. I'm not exactly sure, but I do see Hapatra, so maybe it's a Yawgmoth deck. I'll tell you what, though. The Ugin from the Sean side is going to make it a lot easier for us to figure out what's going on. Is this card is nearly unbeatable for most fair decks. I'm curious to see how this black-green deck, if it does anything unfair to kind of overpower the Ugin.
Yeah, look, City of Traders, Ancient Tomb, not legal in Modern, but, still some decent lands that tap for 2 floating around the format here. And, if your opponent has 3 lands and you're resolving Ugin with your 5 lands, I think you're feeling pretty good about the your chances in this game. As we are going to pop back, Linden, turn 1 Tamio. That has to feel good. And it's already attacking. Made a clue. Look at that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we saw in game one, how in turn two, Linden was a little hesitant about, do I want to play as Tamio or not? And sort of, it's a card you want to protect and run away with the game. Here, getting it down and Chris not having an answer right away makes life so much easier in Linden because he needs to have something that's progressing the game forward. And even if it's just drawing a couple extra cards, that's plenty. And oh, the Psychic Frog backup with 2 threats is so nice.
Yeah, this is now this is pod racing. Tamio into Psychic Frog. I mean, this has in fact killed people as recently as the Last Legacy format before for the ban. So definitely a pretty good start here on the play. We'll see how the Boros Energy deck can catch up. Not much in the way of sweepers, although there is Wrath of the Skies in the sideboard I did notice for Chris. So that is something that could potentially help out here. And of course, 2 discharges in a row or similar will also get the job done, but he's going to have to get rid of these powerful creatures. Much like, the Ragavans and the Ajanis of old, both players are bringing good threats to the table, and that is going to be the first purge to exile that Psychic Frog.
Yeah, we saw Chris also bin in a Johnny, probably assigned to Linden. It's like, oh, you need something specific because that card's quite good, just in the dark. So there's something missing about Chris's hand. Linden's going to pay attention to the decisions and try and figure that out. From Chris's perspective, he just drew another Ajani. So, Linden might think, oh, he just had one here in a second.
Good Magic player, I suppose, as Tamio's going to come back in, make a second clue. The land, sink into Stupor in hand is a potential interaction spell, not really where you want to be. Instead, we're going to tap some mana and play a card. Which one do we want, Linden?
Well, it looks like just a clue, draw a card, actually.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, very. Maybe looking for something like Mishra's Bauble or maybe a
Serum Visions. Yeah.
With the Tamio. Yeah.
Oh, reasonable. Of course. That makes a lot of sense. I forgot. Sorry, again, Legacy player, used to brainstorm. But you do need to work a little bit harder in Modern to flip the old Tamio.
Mm-hmm. Modern is a working man's format.
Yeah, apparently. It's static field here. Going to try and put Tamio in jail and do not pass go into the prison. Into the static field you go. A couple energy getting made here. Obviously not going to last forever, but it basically brings enough energy on its own that it's pretty much forever in a game of Modern. And of course, the Boros Energy deck, as you may suspect from the name, can in fact make more energy. So Tamio unlikely to be freed from these shackles for quite a while, if at all, this game.
Yeah, one of the more devastating plays against lots of decks is, Galvanic Discharge. I don't need to use all my energy, so now the prison stays around even longer and I killed your thing. That is sort of, one of the back-breaking plays that this deck can present, as another Goblin Bombardment is getting cast this game. We'll see if this one will stick.
Fetching it up here, it looks like, for Linden. So, excuse me, Spell Snare on the mind. Nope, Surveil land instead. Goblin Bombardment is going to resolve, and we'll have a Surveil trigger here. As Linden, once again, considering his options. Feeling tricky, but I mean, Bombardment's such an interesting card because it doesn't represent a problem right now, but it's a big problem kind of as the game goes on. Every card your opponent plays, it feels like. Boros Energy is already a deck that is about playing cards and adding value, and this card just adds extra value to the cards that already bring a ton of value with them, as we are going to put a card into the graveyard there for Linden.
Yeah, it's sort of like worst case scenario. Every kill spell for Linden now has, take 1 attached, right? That's kind of like the best way that things can work out for him. And with cards like Ajani, it makes it really hard for Linden to ever actually kill the Ajani after that first trigger is resolved with the cats. And then, also you have the ability just to, out of nowhere, do a ton of damage and have that red permanent. So, just bolting in, nothing to do here. Just going to hang out.
Yeah, this is totally chill. Do we play Cryptic Command in this format? That card's sweet. It's not in Linden's deck, I can tell you that much. Much to my chagrin.
Recently.
All right, so presumably left up some form of interaction here if we are bolting ourselves with our land. It is subtlety, of course. And that's going to send that creature straight to the bottom of the library. And now I had this one. Oh, it's just a Galvanic. Never mind.
All right. And so Linden, we talked about this earlier, really wants to have a threat so there's something going forward to progress the game. The Tamio is dangerously close to coming back. We did have to use all the energy that Discharge made to answer that subtlety there. So, Linden isn't in a great spot right now, but things aren't so, like call the ambulance. We've got a little bit of breathing room here.
Yeah, definitely considering what balance of interaction and commitment to the board we want to have here. Looks like 2 lands going to get tapped. And the Riddler is back, drawing 1 card this time. But unlike the other time, there are 5 lands in play. It looks like found a Bauble. That's pretty nice. Gonna Bauble himself. Look at the card. Can't do anything about it, but can at least have a look. Does have a fetch land. In fact, if Linden wants to scry it away, and indeed it will do. Look at Look at 25 years of Magic cards all coming together just to optimize one little draw.
Yeah, and it turns
It's
out it's good
beautiful.
enough in modern.
Yep. Note Linden also getting basics this game as well. That is 2 islands in play, so the Riddler is going to be able to come back from Warp for that full 5 cost. And Linden feeling much better about this game. Again, even without the full value on the Quantum Riddler. Drawing 1 card, chaining into a bauble, hitting land drops, being insulated against Blood Moon. All good news here for the Grixis mid-range player as Boris. A little stuck on lands, but more than that, kind of stuck with now a tough decision about this Tamio. Don't know exactly how much energy Chris has. I think it's just off to the bottom of the screen. But given the discharge that happened earlier, you have to imagine the energy is running out for this Static Prison.
Yeah, I think it's at 0 right now. Another very interesting thing from Chris's side is Linden could have just gone, hey, fetch that basic like he ended up doing, and then hard cast the Riddler. But Linden left mana up. So clearly he has something he wants to do. So this is a pretty big turn for Chris on how he wants to sequence it.
Pyro, committing all the mana. But asking Linden the question, do you want to counter this? I'm trying to filter my hand. Hand's pretty full. This is not like a full value Pyro. But again, is it enough?
Yeah, and it looks like Chris does have a Flage in hand. So if this does stick, we're actually going to have then, kind of the Flage hanging over this game for a little bit.
Unless the Spell Bomb comes back around, but you're absolutely right. Does represent more than just what Pyromancer brings to the board. Obviously makes some tokens as well. So going a little wide with the Goblin Bombardment. Again, Grixis mostly efficient single target spells. These 2/1/1s do represent an additional problem, although, as we noted, Linden does have extra sweepers in his board as well. There's a Toxic Deluge also that I noticed. So plenty of options here alongside those Fire Magics that you pointed out, Mason. But again, Boros Energy, just playing the cards that are in their hand. And there's the Fire Magic right on cue. Going to sweep that up real quick. That was the interactive spell that Linden held up. Looks pretty good there in that spot as we maybe untap and just pop the Riddler there with Tamio coming back out of prison in just a moment, we have to assume.
Yeah, Linden here. Getting to use that Fire Magic cleanup, did lose 3 life because of the Goblin Bombardment. Like we talked about, sort of, that's the best case scenario for him a lot of times is, I'm going to take a damage each time. But now has a very interesting point of, I have this Serum Visions. I could try to draw more interactive spells, leave up this clue. Or do I hardcast this Riddler? And is going to go with the Serum Visions. Probably pretty worried about the Flage in the graveyard for Chris.
Yeah, another Fire Magic in hand for Linden as well. So maybe valuing the instant speed sweeper. It's pretty good against small boards. Won't be quite nearly as good against Flage, but as you pointed out, maybe digging for an answer here instead. I'm pretty confident Linden drew a Scalding Tarn off of the Serum Vision's draw and is now considering this scry here. 1 top, 1 bottom, it looks like, is the decision. Can we draw another card here if that one's good? We do have a clue on the table and perhaps a land in hand to play. Hey, is there the Scalding Tarn I saw earlier? We'll see if Linden wants to draw the card before shuffling things away or if just wants to pass it. Just going to pass back here as Flooded Strand. Going to get cracked for Chris.
Yeah, Linden drew Toxic Deluge for the turn. You mentioned that. Very awkward with Goblin Bombardment. And this is a little bit of what I meant when we were talking about, kind of the metagame. Boros Energy, it's really hard to hate out with, Wraths and stuff like that, right? They're pretty good, Even if we didn't have this Bombardment, those Fire Magics would be kind of nice. But look at just how much grind this deck has, and cards like Flage that just finish you off eventually. And Chris kind of has, whatever he wants this turn. Worst case scenario, he can put a Flage on the stack, and if it gets countered, who cares? I've got a big graveyard. I'll get back to it again.
Yeah, I think Chris with a wealth of options here. That Bombardment proving particularly troublesome was, I think, clever of Chris to, again, put it in play early on when there was less interaction that Linden could have. Tamio is going to be gifted back over, but unless Linden can flip it over, I don't think more clues is what we're in the market for here. Linden's at 10 with that Bombardment still in play and still plenty of options for Chris to kind of pass through here. So we'll see what Chris wants to do as he considers his options, but going to tap 4, and that's looking an awful lot like Flage. Never mind. The new Avatar card's going to hit the table instead. Or is it? Linden may have a counter here.
Yeah, I think what Chris is trying to respect here is the card Subtlety. Linden has 4 of it and 4 Force Negation, but Chris is probably going to assume that we at least went down on 1 or 2 forces here, so trying to kind of split the difference and already kind of got Subtlety once. So while this is a little bit less like, hey, I'm going to kill you in the next turn, it's a little better against the potential cards that he thinks Linden could be presenting, and it hits a land plus Discharge.
Yeah, that's pretty sick, and then obviously can play. I think that's Pyromancer is the 3rd card under there that got exiled. So can play that until the end of his next turn as well. So has everything here. Had a land drop, has an instant to play on Linden's turn, and then has a creature to follow up with as well. Again, all with Bombardment still looming over this game. So Linden going to have to puzzle his way out of this. Going to crack a clue, kick things off. That tells me at least that I don't think Tamio is getting flipped. I think Linden's digging desperately for answers here. Going to crack this fetch land as well.
Yeah, I would think Linden would probably not crack the clue if his plan was to flip the Tamio, right? Try and keep
Yeah.
the hand low and hope Riddler draws two. So definitely is looking for some specific card. Honestly, it might be like his Nile Spellbomb, like you talked about before. Just answer that Flage out of the board and then figure out how we're going to answer the rest of these problems. And this is what I meant too about these Psychic Frog decks kind of struggle. Once a couple things get on the board and they get under you, you need to answer the next threat and sort of what's already happening. And that can be a really tricky puzzle sometimes.
Yeah, I will say you called it out right before we even started the show, but Legend of Roku, the new card from Avatar, looking really good in this spot, in this matchup. It is draw 3 cards and then some. Going to make a mana, and then, of course, I think if it ever flips, the game's basically over. So just definitely leveraging some powerful new cards here. As Tamio is going to go ahead and get shot by, looks like Galvanic Discharge? Yeah, Galvanic in the graveyard. So goodbye, Tamio. Not even going to get the option of trying to maybe flip it here with enough draws in a row. And Linden, once again, trying to puzzle things out. Preordain in hand. A couple more cards as well, but an enchantment, not the easiest thing traditionally for Grixis to deal with.
Yeah. And you're seeing Linden here kind of think like, am I supposed to just play this Riddler? Then the Flage comes. Do I represent having subtlety? Chris played around it last turn, right? So, because from Linden's perspective, Flage would have done everything that would have happened here, and we still would have gotten more cards later. So he kind of can probably read, okay, Chris is respecting subtlety. I don't have it. Is he just going to slam the door? And so I need to actually get on the board here and maybe hope to top deck. As it looks like we drew Preordain off the Riddler, but holding up something else, maybe something like an Unholy Heat in hand that can sort of answer the Flage in the short term.
Yep, Heat maybe, Spell Snare. Not nearly as good in the spot, but is another card that obviously Linda could have. And again, Chris, kind of put to the same test. How do you want to sequence here?
Yeah, and getting this Arena of Glory is actually pretty huge. Remember, there's also +1 mana on this turn from the Fuko.
Yep. Just Guide of Souls. Just a little Guide of Souls.
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
Little bait spell. Do you have like a Stern Scolding or something? Okay, no, you don't. Cool.
Also, as pretty good with the Arena, as you mentioned. Might be tough to get 3 energy, but you never know. Although, is it the Guide that has to attack for that to work?
No, it's just attacking.
Look at that. You could just get in there.
Yeah,
I know what cards do sometimes.
Yeah, luckily I helped make some of these ones, so I got them down. Yeah, much like Flage, my baby, as it comes down here. And this with the Arena of Glory is one of the more powerful things to pop out of MH3. Remember, the Fuko did generate a mana for those at home. We did tap enough, and now this Flage hits the battlefield. And this looked like Linden has an Unholy Heat, because I imagine if he didn't, we'd probably be picking our cards up as we would be dead.
Very true. And there we go. That's the Unholy Heat that you suspected was there. Again, still getting sacrificed, so does not get exiled most critically, which obviously would have been much better against a recursive card like Flage. But still, Lightning Bolt when you come down, didn't get the attack trigger, but I don't think you'd be too unhappy, especially with Ocelot Pride as the final card here in the sequence. And that is enough. Linden scoops it up. The fist bump is exchanged. And Linden starting down 0-1. Chris Hart and the Boris Energy deck going to take our first win on camera.
Yeah, that life gain trigger from Flage dealing and gaining 3 with the City's Blessing there was exactly lethal. So Chris kind of had Linden checked.
Sick.
Yeah, great sequencing there from Chris too to sort of get that in. Got the life gain as well from the Flage entering. So just really well played there, and just shows kind of how this matchup can be a really big struggle. And if you're Linden, you're really hoping players don't show up with decks like this weekend. But we saw that it's the second most played deck of the weekend, so we'll have to see if Linden can overcome this in the coming rounds.
Yeah, really nice. It's funny to see, Ocelot Pride, such a powerful one drop, basically raised the alarm at the end there. But that was enough with the Goblin Bombardment that I think was a big thorn in the side of this Grixis deck. We saw it in both games. Linden really respected it, wanted to fire off a counterspell whenever he could. And it basically undid, I guess, alongside Blood Moon, 2 different enchantments. Undermining Grixis, yeah, that seems about right.
And that's one of the nice things too about having these cards as well, is we saw in a couple spots, Chris played it when Linden was holding up creature interaction, right? So Chris is like, okay, I won't get to the board now, but everything in the future is going to be so much harder for you. You have to have this spell snare now. And then if you start thinking about it, it's like, wait, so my opponent has to have spell snare, and they have to have a creature, and they have to have the lands to cast their threats to kill me. It just ends up in a recipe of being really hard for these kinds of decks to consistently beat. It's doable. Cards like Psychic Frog can run away with the game, but it's a really difficult matchup, and Chris played it incredibly well. So congratulations to him moving on to 1-0.
Yeah, good start to any tournament is picking up W in round one. You may have noticed in the middle of this game, we did have another table. Unsurprisingly, the game we saw where an Ugin was cast against a player with 3 lands in play, that game has ended. So we actually don't have any games right now. We're going to yap on for a bit here as the round has, 15 minutes or so left in this round. Then, of course, we'll queue up round 2 in just a moment. Probably take a little breaky at some point. But we have some time to just kind of relax, chill out, lounge a bit here, Mason. I'm actually curious. Boros Energy, a deck we're probably going to see a decent amount of this tournament and potentially on camera as well. What matchups don't you want? If this is one you want, what matchups do you definitely not want to see as Boros Energy? Even though you do have game kind of against the field, what are you not hoping to play?
Okay, so like my TikTok answer is decks that don't play normal Magic, right?
Yep,
so if your opponent's belching you, storming you, neoforming you, even to some extent, sometimes like Tron can be a bit of an issue, especially if all its dust is in the deck. Amulet Titan, these are things that can be really big issues. And when you're not playing normal Magic, Boros Energy sort of defaults to being an aggro deck. And at the end of the day, Boros Energy is kind of like an aggressive Jund deck, right? So it has those draws, like we talked about before, where it's like, yeah, I go Ragavan into, maybe a 2 and a 1 drop or a 3 drop, or I go double Ocelot Pride and I can run you over. But that is asking a lot of you, and you need to kill them before they kill you. And the secret to decks that don't play normal Magic is they kind of play quickly, right? And so it puts a lot of pressure to have a lot of it early. So if you're Boros Energy, that's really what you don't want to play against. And you're really wanting to play against decks like what we just saw there that are kind of grindy, interactive-y, maybe trying to play 1 or 2 cards to kind of take over the game. And you're hopeful that your sort of Galvanic Discharge, Static Prison, Thraben Charms line up well enough against those to keep them at bay that you can do just what we saw there, get some early pressure, and then deal a little bit of damage with Flagral Bombardment or Johnny to end the game.
Yeah, it makes sense. The honest deck is not happy against the dishonest decks and pretty happy against the honest ones there. So it makes sense. Potentially even see the mirror, which, that's the most honest Magic we could ask for, surely, here at RC Calgary. We're going to take a quick break here in round 1, but when we come back, it'll be round 2 and even more modern Magic coming up after this. Stay tuned.